Welcome to Dustin Cathro Book Reviews.
Hi everybody, Dustin Cathro here. Today I'm doing my first book review on one of the most legendary fantasy books, in my humbled opinion, out there on the market, and that is Terry Goodkind's Wizard's First Rule. A little bit of a controversial book at its best, but we're going to unpack and talk about a few main points today. The length of Wizard's First Rule. We're going to talk about some of the common tropes that are in it, and we're also going to be talking about a negative thing. The length of this book. It's large for a first book. Even if you're a fantasy lover, it's a big commitment. Like, we're talking, it's like 800 pages plus. And it can be a little daunting at times, especially if you're a new fantasy person, that reading 800-page book is it's going to take some time. Terry Goodkind was not merciful on the delivery of this book. So a couple of spoilers here. Don't listen if you don't want to hear a few spoilers. But, classic trope. There's a magical weapon in this book series. It's called the Sword of Truth. And the Sword of Truth is a little bit interesting, though, because like all magic weapons, it works a certain way. Specifically in the Sword of Truth series, though, the Seeker is what Richard is. He activates the Sword of Truth almost through a type of rage. And this rage powers the sword, whether that be for good or for bad. And then when he uses that weapon and slays someone, kills someone, he feels the goodness of that person, even if they're very evil. But if he uses the Sword of Truth to kill someone, he feels the good part of them. And so it's like the consequence of him murdering someone is that he feels the good part of even the worst enemy, which is kind of an interesting idea in itself. A unique thing, I thought, of the Sword of Truth series that I've never really encountered too much in fantasy, that I can recall at least, is that this thing called the boundary, it's interesting. I never really, it's like a force field between these lands, and I always am thinking, I don't know if I have ever heard of something like that in another fantasy novel where these magical barriers are separating these places, mostly for political and ideological reasons, seemingly in the book. They're separating, but also for safety. If you want to know more about the boundary and kind of like a prequel to the Sword of Truth series and A Wizard's First Rule specifically, there's a really good book, and it's called Debt of Bones. And it was written by Terry Goodkind, obviously, but post writing these books. And so he kind of has the prequel to explain why the boundary was made and how the boundary was made, which can actually kind of give you a bit of an indication on what's going on in Wizard's First Rule. So you can actually read Dead of Bones and not really, you should read Dead of Bones before you read Wizard's First Rule, just to have a better understanding of what's happening in Wizard's First Rule. But you don't need to, but I would recommend it if you're into fantasy and you want to kind of know the history leading into this amazing book of Wizard's First Rule. I'd recommend reading Dead of Bones. It's really great. Okay, spoiler alert slightly. The ending is surprising. Even if it seems cliche in the most obvious sense, you're like, holy crap. That? What? To me, I was still surprised, even though you hear about that type of ending in this story all the time, but then you're like, really? That is it? And then there's the little background when you get there, and that's why you got to read Dead of Bones too, because it just you're like, what? Because you don't know that what happens in the Wizard's First Rule, obviously in this book, but you know what happens in here. And then the ending to Wizard's First Rule is even more surprising after you've read Dead of Bones, because you're trying to be when and how. And then the irony, it's just a classic. It's good though, because it catches you off guard, even if you're expecting it a bit. You're like, there's no way, there's just no way, and then it happens. So the ending is definitely surprising, even if it's cliche. It'll be so cliche it's surprising. So a common critique of this book, which I think a lot of people would probably make, is that there's kind of some unnecessary There's like, there's definitely less than 100 pages, but there's more than 50 of some pretty gnarly kind of torture going on. And I think that it's not for everyone, and it doesn't need to be in the story, but it definitely adds an element to the story. It's not something that I personally enjoy, but I can see that there are people that do kind of are into that kind of thing within the genre. You know, in Game of Thrones, for example, there's some hardcore torture stuff that happens, and there's definitely some in this story. I'm not exactly sure sometimes the point, but also it adds this element to it where it's like, that's kind of messed up. That's kind of what you're left with. And the character goes through a lot, the main character, Richard Cypher. So I think it's something that we definitely can talk about. It's definitely a negative thing, I think, for the book. I think it makes the audience have to be older to read this book, actually. If it didn't have that in the book, you might be able to have some younger people read the book. But maybe it's not the point. We don't know what the artist was thinking when they were making this story. We don't know what Terry was up to. We don't know what he's into. And we won't, because he passed away not too long ago. But it's a common criticism, and I think that it's easy to talk about that as a fault in the book, for sure. So watch out for the torture. It could be less than 100 pages long. It could be more than 50. It's definitely more. It's more than 50 for sure. So, well, this concludes my very first book review on Wizard's First Rule. Just to sum it up, I guess, I would say that Wizard's First Rule is an underappreciated book in the fantasy genre, in that there's a lot of negative backlash around Terry Goodkind specifically, but that doesn't mean that his writing isn't good, and it doesn't mean that the book isn't worth reading. And I think that you shouldn't be afraid to pick up Wizard's First Rule, and if you are feeling really motivated, also trying The Dead of Bones before reading Wizard's First Rule, because it's a great complement to the book, and it's a great way to enter into the Sword of Truth series, which is an amazing series that has been out for so long, and it's very underappreciated. It comes with its flaws, like all works of art do, but I think that if we all just come together here and enjoy reading fantasy and talk about it and all the things we think about it and the fandom, it's all great stuff, guys. So yeah, I really appreciate any feedback. I appreciate any comments, likes, anything on this video. So till next time, Dustin Cathro here.